Hi, it's Jack from Veterinary IT Services, and today I'm going to be talking to you about old technology and how it could impact your practice. Old equipment comes in ultimately many different forms. In hardware, this is your laptops, your desktops, things like your servers, even your displays. It's usually any equipment that's over 3 to 5 years old. The exception to this rule sometimes can be servers, as they are generally designed to last a little bit longer. Ultimately, it comes down to the hardware manufacturer and the software vendor. In essence, it's when they stop providing support for these devices and the software. There are many impacts by having old equipment and software in your practice. Probably the most significant would be downtime. Let's just say, for example, you've got an old server in the corner of your practice that's running your PMS. That piece of equipment decides to die for some reason. You're unable to do your job, you're unable to access patient information, you're unable to process payments. Your PMS is your lifeblood for your business. This then has a knock-on effect to impact your customers, your patients, because you're unable to offer them any support because you're unable to get the information, which is then going to lead to very frustrated clients, which ultimately then passes on to a damage to your reputation. Now, all these factors are going to have a negative impact on your bottom line because you're not bringing in new business, you're unable to process existing business, which is obviously a great cost to you. And then you've also got to consider replacing the equipment itself. Now, all these aspects are negative for the business, which is then going to rub onto the team. If they can't access the information, they're having to deal with the frustrated clients, they're going to feel pretty low about the whole situation. Now, these are all symptoms of larger problems: security, dotage, and compatibility. How does it impact security? Well, old software and equipment ultimately leaves you vulnerable because the software and equipment is not being patched, it's not being kept up to date because it's not being supported, which leaves a lot of gaping holes for hackers. Now, you may think to yourself, well, hey, I'm a small business, why would I be targeted? Well, did you know 43% of small businesses are targeted by cyber attacks? Now, as I said, hackers exploit the vulnerabilities within these unpatched equipment and software, so it's an easy target for them. So what do I mean by dotage in this context? Ultimately, technology is advancing at such an unprecedented rate, and there is no exception with regards to the veterinary sector. Now, this team, with the fact that the veterinary sector is under so much pressure, we know you guys are doing so much, you're under so much pressure, especially given the current pandemic. This does unfortunately mean that elements such as technology issues do get pushed to the side. Now, we've seen a lot of this in relation to the 2020 problem. This is essentially where Microsoft has turned around and marked a number of pieces of its key software as end of life, which basically means they're no longer going to support and update it, which ultimately has a big security risk to it, which we've already discussed. But it's not just about security. Old equipment and software also is going to impact your team's performance, as the systems are going to run slower, which means they can't do their job as efficiently as they could, which is then going to impact client care, which is also something we've discussed. Now, we believe that most practices in the UK are still using at least one piece of equipment or software that is affected by the 2020 problem, and this is why we'd urge you to, where if you haven't already done so, ask your IT firm and get them to double check and make sure that this isn't the case. So how does it impact compatibility? Well, ultimately you use an array of different systems that all have to talk to each other, whether it be, for example, an imaging device which talks to a PACS system which ultimately talks to your PMS system. Now, just imagine if one of those elements in the chain were to fail. It's going to impact your practice. Now, all it takes is one of these vendors to stop supporting either the out-of-date equipment or the software, and your whole practice is going to grind to a halt in regards to that function, which is never good. So the big question, does it impact GDPR? Well, unfortunately, the answer to that question is yes, it does. Your veterinary systems contain an array of different PII, personally identifiable information. Now, obviously, as a UK business, you have a responsibility to protect this information. Now, these old systems and software ultimately have a number of vulnerabilities, which are easy ways in for cyber criminals. Now, if the cyber criminals can get in, it's going to arise attention for the ICO, because ultimately you're not compliant if you're unable to protect your client's information. So it doesn't have to be that difficult. The first thing to do would be to conduct an audit, and you can always get an external party to assist you with that. That enables you to identify where your potential risks are. Now, the first thing I would do is highlight items and equipment and software that you don't frequently use. If you don't use it, you don't need it, take it out, it reduces your risk. The next step would be to highlight the items that are remaining and create some sort of plan, a technology roadmap. It makes it easier for you to plan as to when you need to replace things, and ultimately helps with the budgeting side of things because you know when to expect these costs. The other thing to consider is to make sure that you continue to update all your remaining equipment, so keep it up to date by applying regular software patches and firmware updates for hardware. Thanks for watching, I hope you found the video useful. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and do check out our blog for up-to-date tips and tricks.